If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. Chapter 1: The World That Made a Warrior King. Part 1: The Deccan in Chains, Mughal Dominance, and the Sultanate Stranglehold. Picture this. It is the early 1600s. The Deccan Plateau, that vast sun-baked stretch of land in central and southern India, is being pulled apart like a piece of bread by hungry hands. From the north, the Mughal Empire is pushing down. The Mughals are one of the most powerful empires the world has ever seen. Their armies are enormous. Their emperor sits on a throne dripping with gold, and they want more land. They always want more land. But the Mughals are not the only problem. Right there in the Deccan itself, two powerful sultanates, the Adil Shahi of Bijapur and the Nizam Shahi of Ahmadnagar, have already carved the region into their personal kingdoms. Think of them like two neighborhood bosses who already control the street, just as a third, bigger gang moves in from outside. Caught in the middle of all this? Ordinary people. Farmers trying to grow crops, families trying to eat, small chieftains trying to protect their villages. These people paid tax after tax. Sometimes, soldiers would ride into a village, take what they wanted, and leave. If you complained, you suffered. If you resisted, you were crushed. There was no one coming to save you. The Maratha people felt this especially hard. The Marathas were a proud warrior community, spread across the Deccan. For generations, their men had fought in great armies, won battles, and earned honor. But now, they were hired soldiers fighting other people's wars for other people's glory. Their own land, their own people, their own culture, all of it was slowly being squeezed. There was also something deeper going on, something that hurt in a way that goes beyond hunger or poverty. The temples that Maratha communities had worshipped in for centuries were sometimes destroyed or taxed into ruin. Local traditions were mocked or pushed aside. People felt like strangers in their own home. No one had a plan to fix any of this. No single leader had stood up and said, "Enough. This land belongs to us. We will take it back." Not yet. But somewhere in this exhausted, angry, broken world, a boy was about to be born. A boy whose father was a frustrated warrior, dreaming of power he could never quite hold. A boy whose mother would raise him on stories of heroes who fought back against impossible odds. That boy would grow up, looking at chains everyone else accepted as normal, and decide to break them. His name was Shivaji Bhonsle, and before we understand what he did, we need to understand the man who came before him, the restless, ambitious father who spent his whole life reaching for something he could never quite grasp, but somehow passed that hunger straight into his son. Part 2: Shahaji Bhonsle, the ambitious father who planted the seed of empire. Shahaji Bhonsle was the kind of man who was always one step away from greatness, and he knew it. That knowledge aided him his whole life. He was a Maratha commander, sharp and bold, with a soldier's instincts and a politician's mind. But the world he lived in did not leave much room for men like him. The Deccan was carved up by powerful sultanates, and if you wanted to survive, let alone thrive, you had to serve someone bigger than yourself. So Shahaji did exactly that. He served Ahmadnagar, then Bijapur. For a brief, uncomfortable stretch, even the Mughals. He switched sides when he had to, made deals when he had to, smiled at men he probably despised. But here is what made Shahaji different from just another hired sword. He was always playing a longer game. Through his service to Bijapur, he managed to secure something called a Jagir, a land grant. Specifically, the Pune Jagir, a stretch of territory in the western Deccan. It was not a kingdom. He had no crown, no full independence, no army that answered to him alone. But it was land, it was roots, and for a Maratha commander drowning in other people's wars, that meant everything. He stationed his young wife Jijabai and their son Shivaji in Pune while he went off fighting battles across the Deccan. He was away for years at a time. In some ways he was an absent father, but his absence was also a kind of teaching. The boy grew up watching what happened to men who depended entirely on foreign masters. He saw the ceiling his father kept hitting. He felt the frustration Shahaji never fully voiced, but never fully hid. What Shahaji did pass on directly was identity. In his household, being Maratha meant something. The old stories of Hindu kings and Maratha warriors were not just entertainment, they were a reminder of what had been lost, and what could, maybe, be reclaimed. Shahaji dreamed of Maratha self-rule. He just never found a way to make it real. His career was brilliant, but broken. He got arrested by Bijapur once, used as a bargaining chip against his own son years later. He was always too powerful to ignore, and never powerful enough to be truly free. But that hunger, that unfinished ambition, did not die with his frustrations. It passed like something genetic, straight into the boy growing up in Pune. Shivaji watched his father reach and fall short his whole life. And somewhere in that watching, a different kind of determination took shape. The father had tried to work within the system. The son was already beginning to wonder if the system itself needed to be torn down. And the person pouring that thought into his ears every single day was not Shahaji. It was his mother. Part 3. Jijabai, the mother who forged a king's soul. She was not a soft woman. She could not afford to be. Jijabai had seen enough of the world's cruelty to know that kindness without strength gets buried. Her own family, the proud Jadhav clan, had been pulled into political games and come out broken. Her husband Shahaji was brilliant, but always somewhere else, serving this sultan, negotiating with that general, chasing a dream of power across the Deccan. So Jijabai raised Shivaji mostly alone, and she made a choice about how to do it. She did not shelter him from the hard truths of their world. She sat him down and told him stories, but these were not soft stories. She told him the Ramayana, the story of Ram, a righteous king who loses everything, builds an army from scratch, and fights back against an enemy far more powerful than him. She told him the Mahabharata, warriors who face impossible choices, who fight not just for land or glory, but because some things are simply wrong and must be resisted. She told these stories the way a general reads a map, with purpose, with intention. To Jijabai, what was happening around them was not just politics, it was something deeper. The Mughal armies marching through the Deccan, the Bijapur sultans taxing Hindu villages into dust, temples broken, farmers humiliated. She saw all of it as adharma. That is a Sanskrit word meaning the absence of righteous order, the opposite of how the world should be. And she told her son, with absolute conviction, that when adharma rules, it is the duty of the righteous to fight back. This was not a small idea to plant in a child's mind, it was everything. She gave it a name too, Hindavi Swaraja. It means self-rule for the Hindu people. Not just freedom from one king or one sultan, a completely different way of life. A world where the Marathas, where ordinary people, could live with dignity under their own rule, answering to no foreign power. Shivaji heard this before he was even a teenager. He heard it at the dinner table, he heard it in the stories, he heard it in the way his mother looked at the world around her, not with helplessness, but with a quiet, burning refusal to accept it. A boy shaped by a frustrated father learns ambition, but a boy shaped by Jijabai learns something harder to stop. He learns that he has a reason, that what he wants is not selfish, that it is right. By the time Shivaji was old enough to hold a sword, he already had something more dangerous than a weapon. He had a cause. And the hills surrounding Pune were about to give him the perfect classroom to learn exactly how to fight for it. Part 4. The Hills of the Sahyadri, How Geography Became Shivaji's First Weapon. The hills did not care about empires. They never had. The Sahyadri Mountains, what people today call the Western Ghats, ran along the western edge of the Deccan, like a giant broken wall. Steep, jagged, covered in thick forest and swirling mist. Gorges so deep you could not see the bottom. Paths so narrow that two men could barely walk side by side. For most commanders of the time, this was simply bad terrain. Mughal armies moved on muscle and mass, thousands of heavily armored cavalry, war elephants, and massive supply trains. Those armies needed flat, open ground. They needed roads. The Sahyadri gave them none of that. But Shivaji did not grow up reading maps in a palace. He grew up in these hills. From the time he was a boy running around Pune with dirt on his feet, the mountains were his backyard. He did not just see them, he knew them the way you know your own house in the dark. Which step creaks, which door sticks, where to hide if you have to. Every ridge, every hidden path through the forest. Every rocky plateau where a small group of men could hold off a much larger force. Where an enemy general saw a wall, Shivaji saw a weapon. Think about what that actually meant. If you are a powerful army trying to crush a smaller enemy, your strength is your size, your horses, your numbers. But what if none of that works? What if the ground itself keeps fighting against you? Narrow paths mean you cannot charge. Dense trees mean you cannot see. Steep slopes mean your heavy horses slow to a crawl, while your enemy, who weighs half as much and carries lighter weapons, just runs away into the forest. Shivaji understood this before he understood almost anything else about war. He became obsessed with the hill forts scattered across the Sahyadri. These were old stone forts built on the tops of steep hills, nearly impossible to attack from below, easy to defend from above. He saw them not as ruins of the past, but as the bones of the future kingdom. Whoever held the forts, held the hills. Whoever held the hills, controlled the whole region beneath them. This thinking would shape everything. The way he fought, the soldiers he trained, the battles he chose, and the ones he refused. He would never try to beat a bigger army by hitting it head-on. He would hit it fast, from unexpected angles, and then disappear back into the mountains before it could respond. But a strategy is only as good as the men who carry it out. And the kind of fighting Shivaji had in mind could not be done by just any soldier. It needed a very specific kind of warrior, someone who knew these hills just as deeply as he did. He was about to find them, right in his own backyard. Part 5. The Mavala Companions. Building a brotherhood before building an army. So Shivaji had the mountains, he had the strategy forming in his head. But a young man alone in the hills is just a dreamer. To actually do something, he needed people, real people. People who would follow him not because a king ordered them to, but because they actually believed in him. He found them right there in the Mavala region, the communities tucked into the folds of the Sahyadri hills around Pune. These were not princes or trained soldiers. They were farmers who woke up before sunrise, herdsmen who chased goats across steep rocky slopes, village boys who had grown up running barefoot on the same mountain paths that Shivaji knew by heart. They were called the Mavalyas, and most powerful men of the time would have looked right past them. Shivaji did not. He spent years, not weeks, not months, but years, getting to know these young men personally. He ate with them, he trained with them, he listened to their frustrations about taxes that squeezed their families dry, about raids that burned their villages, about a world where nobody who looked like them held any real power. And then he told them something different. He told them it did not have to stay that way. This was the idea of Swarajya, which simply means self-rule or our own kingdom, not a distant king taking everything, not foreign armies deciding their fate, a kingdom that actually belonged to its own people. His mother Jijabai had planted that idea deep inside him, and now he was passing it on like a flame, going from one torch to the next. What made these young men stay was not just the idea. It was Shivaji himself. He had a way of making each person feel seen. He remembered names. He showed respect. He never acted like the son of a noble who was doing ordinary people a favor by talking to them. He made them feel like they were part of something real, something that mattered. One by one, then group by group, they committed to him. And because they came from these hills, they were already exactly the kind of fighters his plan required. Fast, light, tough, and completely at home in terrain that would make any outsider stumble. This was not a formal army yet. There were no uniforms, no official ranks, no salaries from a treasury. It was a brotherhood first, a group of young men who trusted each other, and trusted Shivaji with something you cannot buy, loyalty that comes from the heart. That brotherhood was the seed of everything that came next, because Shivaji's first real move, the one that would shock the entire Deccan, was already forming in his mind, and he would need every single one of these men to pull it off. Chapter 2. The Sword is Drawn. First Conquests and the Birth of a Strategy. Part 1. The Capture of Torna Fort. A 16-year-old declares war on the world. Picture a teenage boy standing at the base of a massive hill in the dark. The year is 1645. The air is cold, the climb ahead is steep, and this boy, just 16 years old, is about to do something that would shake an entire empire. His name is Shivaji Bhonsle, and tonight he is coming for Torna Fort. Torna was not a small outpost. It sat high in the mountains southwest of Pune, a giant stone fortress that had been under the control of the Bijapur Sultanate for years. The Sultanate was powerful, a major kingdom that ruled much of the Deccan Plateau, and expected total obedience from everyone within its reach. No ordinary person would even think about touching one of their forts. Shivaji was not ordinary. He had spent years quietly preparing for this moment. He knew the mountain paths better than most soldiers knew their own homes. He had built real friendships with the young men of the Naval region, tough, loyal, hard-working fighters who believed in him completely. And he had done his homework. He knew the fort's garrison was small. He knew the soldiers inside were bored, underpaid, and had no reason to die fighting. He knew exactly when and how to move. So, he moved at night. Quiet, fast, no banners, no war cries. By morning, Torna Fort was his. The takeover was almost bloodless. The small garrison barely resisted. And when Shivaji walked through those stone gates, he found something unexpected. Treasure. A store of wealth left inside the fort. He did not waste a single coin. Every bit of it went straight into his next plan. Reinforcing the fort, feeding his men, and preparing for what came next. Word spread fast across the Deccan. A 16-year-old had taken a Bijapur fort. Some people laughed. Some people got nervous. The smart ones paid very close attention, because Shivaji was not finished. He had not acted on impulse or teenage boldness. He had followed a plan, and Torna was just the first step of it. The Bijapur Sultanate had power, money, and armies. What it did not expect was someone who refused to play by the usual rules, someone who would not march armies into open fields for grand battles, but instead move quietly through mountains, strike fast, and then disappear. Shivaji had just told the Deccan something important, without saying a single word. He had said, "I am here. I am not afraid of you, and I am just getting started." The forts around Torna were watching, and soon they would fall too. Part 2. Rajgad, Kondana, and Purandar, constructing a kingdom of stone. Torna had sent a message. Now Shivaji had to back it up. He moved fast, very fast. Within months of taking Torna, he had his eyes on Rajgad, a massive mountain about 40 miles south of Pune. Rajgad was not just big, it was enormous. Its walls ran across 3 separate hilltops, connected by narrow ridges. Anyone trying to attack it would have to climb steep cliffs while defenders rained arrows from above. Shivaji looked at Rajgad and saw something no one else had bothered to see. He saw a capital city. He took it. Then he rebuilt it, adding storage rooms, wells, temples, living quarters, and strong walls. This was no longer just a place to hide. This was a seat of power, a place where decisions were made, records were kept, and people came to seek justice. Shivaji was not just collecting forts, he was building a government, one mountain at a time. Then came Kondana. This one was trickier. It sat directly above Pune and was held by a commander loyal to Bijapur. Shivaji used every tool he had. Quiet talks, money passed through the right hands, and a sudden strike when the moment was right. Kondana fell. Later, the fort would be renamed Sinagad, the Lion's Fort, and it would become one of the most famous names in Maratha history. Purandar came next. It sat on a wide plateau that looked down over the roads connecting the Deccan's most important trading towns. Anyone who held Purandar could watch and control the movement of goods, armies, and information across a huge stretch of land. Shivaji took it. Now step back and look at what he had done. In just a few years, a teenager with no official army and no formal title had built a chain of mountain forts stretching across the Deccan. Each one was stocked with grain, weapons, and gold. Each one was run by men loyal to him. Not to Bijapur, not to any sultan, but to him. The forts were everything. In the Deccan, mountains were not just geography. They were power. Flat land could be crossed by any army with enough horses, but a hilltop fort with thick walls and a loyal garrison could hold out for months against forces 10 times its size. Shivaji understood this better than anyone around him. Bijapur had massive armies. It had wealth, cannon, and experienced generals. But it could not easily chase a man who lived in the clouds. The Adil Shahi court in Bijapur was watching all of this, and they were starting to worry. This young Bhonsle boy was not raiding and running. He was building something permanent, something that looked dangerously like a kingdom. They decided it was time to stop him, and they knew exactly where to hit him to make it hurt. Part 3. Bijapur strikes back, Shahaji arrested, and the son refuses to bow. They knew his father. Shahaji Bhonsle was a respected Maratha commander who had spent his life serving powerful sultans. He was Shivaji's father, yes, but more than that, he was a man with a reputation, a career, and a life that could be taken away. Bijapur's court looked at Shivaji's growing chain of forts and made a cold calculation. They could not catch the son in the mountains, so they grabbed the father in the plains. In 1648, Bijapur arrested Shahaji on charges that were by most accounts completely made up. The message to Shivaji was simple and brutal. Stop what you are doing, or your father dies. Think about what that moment must have felt like. Shivaji was in his late teens. His father was in chains because of him. The forts he had captured, the men who followed him, the whole dream he was building, all of it had put his own father's life in danger. Most young men would have broken. Most would have surrendered and begged for forgiveness. Shivaji did not break. But he was also smart enough not to be reckless. He pulled back from his most aggressive operations. He stopped pushing outward, stopped grabbing new territory. He gave Bijapur just enough quiet to believe he might be yielding, but he did not give up a single fort. Not one stone wall was handed back. At the same time, Shivaji worked quietly through messengers and allies to pressure Bijapur from different directions. He used every diplomatic contact he could find. He made the cost of holding Shahaji feel higher than the cost of releasing him. It was patient, careful work, not the behavior of a hot-headed boy, but of someone who could think in moves ahead. In 1649, Shahaji was freed. And when the dust settled, Shivaji still had everything he had built. Every fort, every man, every grain of territory. He had just survived something that was designed to destroy him, and he had come out the other side stronger. Not because he was lucky, but because he understood something important. Power is not just about what you can grab. It is also about what you refuse to let go of when someone is squeezing you. Bijapur had tested him and learned something uncomfortable. This young man could take pain without panicking. He could hold steady when the world was pressing down on him. That is a rare thing in any person. In a military commander, it is something else entirely. Shivaji had passed through fire and stayed whole. Now with his father safe and his forts intact, his mind began turning towards something bigger. Not just how to survive the empires around him, but how to actually fight them on his own terms. Part 4. The Doctrine takes shape. Speed, surprise, and the mountain as ally. His mind had changed. You could see it in the way he moved. Faster, quieter, and always one step ahead. After everything that had happened, the forts, his father's arrest, the slow dance with Bijapur, Shivaji had learned something that no book can teach him. He had learned how to fight a bigger enemy without letting that enemy use its size against him. Here is the problem most commanders faced back then. The powerful armies of the Deccan, Bijapur, the Mughals, the Sultanates, they all fought the same way. Thousands of soldiers marching together, war elephants crashing through enemy lines, massive cannons dragged across plains, enormous supply chains, food, water, weapons, stretched for miles behind the army. That kind of army is terrifying when it meets you face to face on open ground. But it is also slow, predictable, and completely lost in the mountains. Shivaji saw this, and he built his entire fighting style around it. He kept his men light, no heavy baggage, no unnecessary equipment. His soldiers could move through the hills in the dark, cover enormous distances in a single night, and vanish before sunrise. They knew every path, every ridge, every hidden cave in the Sahyadri mountains. This was their home. They had grown up here. The mountains were not just scenery, they were walls, escape routes, hiding places, and weapons all at once. His approach was simple but devastating. Find where the enemy is weakest, hit that spot hard and fast, then disappear before they can hit back. An enemy general waiting for a traditional battle, cavalry charge against cavalry charge, would find nothing to fight. Shivaji would not show up on the open field. He would attack the supply line instead, or the rear camp, or a different fort entirely, miles away, while the enemy was looking in the wrong direction. It confused people. It frustrated them, and frustrated enemies make mistakes. There was also something deeper going on here. Shivaji was using fear as a weapon. His enemies never knew when he would strike, where he would strike, or how. That uncertainty lived in their heads every single day. Generals who had spent their whole careers reading the rules of Deccan warfare suddenly had no rulebook to follow. They were chasing shadows through mountains that those shadows called home. This was not accidental. Shivaji had studied his land, his people, and his enemies carefully. He was building something deliberate, a method of war shaped around what he had and what they did not. And that method was about to be tested in a way that would change everything. There was one more obstacle standing between Shivaji and full control of his region, a powerful local chief who controlled a valley so important that whoever held it held the key to the entire Konkan coast. Part 5. The Jolly Coup, eliminating a rival and inheriting the Konkan gateway. That powerful local chief was Chandra Rao Moore, and the valley he controlled was called Jolly. Picture a narrow green valley cutting through the western Ghats like a hidden passage. On one side sat the high Deccan plateau. On the other, far below, stretched the Konkan coast, a long strip of land running along the Arabian Sea. Whoever controlled Jolly controlled the road between these two worlds. Trade, troop movements, supplies. Everything moving between the coast and the interior had to pass through or around it. Chandra Rao Moore knew exactly what he had, and he was not going to hand it to anyone. Moore was not a small-time local headman. He was a powerful Maratha chief with his own soldiers, his own forts, and his own pride. He had watched Shivaji rise and had made a clear choice. He would not join him, not bow to him, not share anything with him. Whether it was ego, distrust, or simply the stubborn instinct of a man who had held power long enough to think it was permanent, Moore refused to align. For Shivaji, this was not just an insult. It was a wall in the middle of his plans. He could not build a kingdom on the Deccan alone. The Konkan coast meant ports, trade, money, and eventually ships. All of that required access through Jolly, and Moore sat right in the middle of it, unwilling to move. So in 1656, Shivaji did something that showed exactly what kind of leader he was becoming. He did not charge in, he talked first. He opened negotiations with the Moor chiefs. Calm, friendly conversations about cooperation and shared futures. The Moor leadership saw a table, a discussion, a chance to manage this ambitious young man on their own terms. What they did not see was that the talking was just the setup. At the moment the Moor chiefs were settled into those conversations, thinking they were dealing with politics, Shivaji's forces moved, hard and fast. The chiefs were killed, their soldiers scattered, the valley fell. It was brutal. There is no other word for it. But Shivaji had learned something that most rulers only understand too late. An enemy left standing on your border does not stay quiet forever. He removed the problem completely. What he gained was enormous. The Jolly Valley, its soldiers, many of whom joined him, its resources, and sitting right there, looking over the surrounding land from a commanding height, was the hill that would soon become Pratapgarh, one of his most important forts. The Konkan was now open to him. The boy who took Torna at 16 had become something else entirely. He was a man who could smile across a negotiating table while his army was already moving. The Deccan was starting to understand that. Bijapur, far larger and far more powerful, was about to understand it too. Chapter 3. The Making of a Legend. Battles that Shook the Deccan. Part 1. The Killing of Afzal Khan, Genius, Nerve, and the Tiger's Claw. By 1659, Shivaji had already made the Bijapur Sultanate very nervous. He had taken their forts, built his own army, and refused to bow down. So Bijapur decided enough was enough. They sent their biggest weapon, a general named Afzal Khan. Afzal Khan was not a man people took lightly. He was enormous in size, famous for his cruelty, and had crushed many enemies before. He marched toward Shivaji at the head of a massive army, and he came with one simple order: bring Shivaji back, dead or alive. To make things worse, on his way through the Deccan, Afzal Khan destroyed Hindu temples. He was trying to make Shivaji angry enough to do something stupid, like charging in with emotion instead of thinking clearly. It did not work. Shivaji watched, stayed calm, and thought. He knew he could not beat Afzal Khan in an open battlefield. The Bijapur army was too big, so instead of fighting the battle Afzal Khan wanted, Shivaji chose to create a completely different one. He sent a message suggesting a personal meeting, just the two of them, face to face, at the fort of Pratapgarh. A peace talk, or so it seemed. Afzal Khan agreed, probably thinking this was Shivaji giving up. But Shivaji was not giving up. He was setting a trap. On the day of the meeting, Shivaji dressed carefully. Beneath his robes, he wore hidden armor. In one hand, tucked inside his closed fist, he carried a weapon called a wagnak, which means tiger's claw. It was a small iron weapon with curved blades, designed to fit between the fingers and tear through flesh when you close your hand. When the two men met and stepped in to greet each other, Afzal Khan made his move. He tried to crush Shivaji in his arms and go for his dagger. But Shivaji was ready. He drove the tiger claws into Afzal Khan's body and tore him open. Then he gave the signal. Hidden Maratha soldiers, who had been waiting in the trees and hills, came pouring out. The Bijapur army, suddenly leaderless and shocked, fell apart completely. They ran. The great general was dead, and his mighty army was destroyed in a matter of hours. Word of what happened spread fast. Shivaji had looked into the eyes of the most feared general in the Deccan, and won, not with a bigger army, but with sharper thinking and iron nerves. People who had been watching from a distance started to see Shivaji differently. He was not just a hill chief holding a few forts. He was something else entirely. Part 2. The Battle of Kolhapur and the Sack of Bijapur's territories, pushing the advantage. The news of Afzal Khan's death hit Bijapur like a thunderclap. But Shivaji did not stop to celebrate. He moved fast, faster than anyone expected. Bijapur scrambled to respond. They sent another army south, this time under a commander named Rustam Zaman. The Sultanate needed to show that it could still fight, still protect its lands, still be feared. But Shivaji was not the same man he had been even a year before. He now had weapons, horses, and soldiers captured from Afzal Khan's destroyed force. He was stronger, faster, and far more confident. The two armies met near Kolhapur in late 1659. It was not close. Shivaji's forces hit Rustam Zaman's army hard and fast, using the same kind of aggressive, unpredictable tactics that had become his signature. The Bijapur army broke. Another general, another defeat. What happened next was not simply a celebration of victory. Shivaji turned it into a full campaign. He swept through the territories that Bijapur controlled in the Deccan, the towns, the forts, the supply depots. His forces moved with speed that made it impossible for Bijapur to mount any organized defense. They captured forts that gave them control of mountain passes and trade routes. They seized weapons, horses, and grain that would feed and arm a growing force. Town after town fell before Bijapur could even respond. Some people hear this and think raids and looting, but that is not quite the right picture. Shivaji was sending a message, and every local chief in the Deccan was listening carefully. The message was simple. Bijapur cannot protect you anymore. They could not protect Afzal Khan. They could not protect Rustam Zaman. They cannot protect these towns or these forts. If you are looking for a strong hand to stand behind, look here. And people listened. Local chieftains who had stayed neutral started making contact with Shivaji. Communities that had waited to see who would win began to shift. Power in the Deccan is not just about armies. It is about who people believe in, who they trust to still be standing tomorrow. Bijapur was bleeding, not just soldiers and territory, but something harder to replace: reputation. The western Deccan, the hills and valleys and forts that Shivaji had been quietly building into a base for years, was no longer just a stronghold. It was starting to look like the heart of something new, a Maratha power that nobody had imagined possible even 5 years earlier. But success attracts dangerous attention. Shivaji had beaten Bijapur twice in months. That kind of news does not stay local for long. Far to the north, in the grand courts of the Mughal Empire, a far larger and far more powerful force was beginning to take notice, and Aurangzeb was not the kind of man to ignore a problem. Part 3. Shaista Khan's Invasion. The Mughals enter the game and get a brutal lesson. Aurangzeb was not a man who panicked, but he was paying attention. He had watched Shivaji destroy Afzal Khan, shatter 2 Bijapur armies, and sweep through the Deccan like a storm. And he understood what it meant. A small regional chief had turned himself into a real power. If left alone, that power would only grow. So Aurangzeb made a move. He sent his uncle, Shaista Khan, south, not with a small force, with one of the largest armies the Deccan had seen in years. Shaista Khan was experienced, confident, and fully backed by the empire. His orders were simple: crush the Marathas and take back the Deccan. In 1660, Shaista Khan marched into Pune without much resistance. And then he did something that was meant to sting. He moved into Lal Mahal, Shivaji's own childhood home, the palace where Shivaji had grown up. He sat in Shivaji's rooms, slept under Shivaji's roof, and made himself comfortable there for nearly 3 years. It was a message, a deliberate one. You are nothing. I own everything you built. For 3 years, Shaista Khan squeezed. He pushed at Shivaji's forts, cut off supply lines, and slowly made life harder for the Marathas. Shivaji could not match him in open battle. The Mughal army was simply too big. So Shivaji waited. He watched. He planned. Then on the night of April 5, 1663, he moved. Shivaji handpicked a small group, around 200 men. They dressed as a wedding party, the kind of late-night procession that was common enough not to raise alarm. They walked straight into Pune, through the streets, past the guards, and then they slipped inside Shaista Khan's compound. What happened next was fast and violent. Shivaji's men cut through the guards in the dark. Shaista Khan heard the noise and ran, barefoot, in the middle of the night, jumping out of a window to escape. He made it out alive, but in the chaos, he lost 3 fingers to a sword. 3 fingers. The man who had occupied Shivaji's home for 3 years ran into the night, missing 3 fingers and every shred of his dignity. The news spread fast. The great Mughal commander, surrounded by thousands of soldiers, had been attacked in his own bedroom by a small group of raiders who walked in disguised as wedding guests. Aurangzeb said nothing publicly. He simply transferred Shaista Khan to Bengal, far away, out of sight, out of the story. But Shivaji was not done sending messages. If anything, he was just getting started. Because his next move would not target a general sleeping in his palace. It would target something far more valuable: the empire's money. Part 4. The Surat sack, striking the Mughal Empire's economic jugular. Surat was not just a city. It was the beating heart of Mughal money. Every year, enormous ships loaded with goods left Surat's docks and sailed toward the Middle East. Merchants from across the world traded there: silk, spices, gold, cotton. And every year, wealthy Muslim pilgrims sailed from Surat to Mecca for Hajj, the holy pilgrimage. The Mughals took great pride in protecting that route. It showed the world they were powerful, respected, and in control. Shivaji decided to walk in and take it all. In January 1664, he led his forces into Surat before the city's governor could even organize a proper defense. The governor locked himself inside a fort and refused to come out. The city's wealthy merchants panicked. Some tried to bargain, some tried to run. Most failed at both. For 3 days, Shivaji's men worked through the city like a slow, careful fire. They emptied warehouses stacked floor to ceiling with goods. They cleaned out the merchant houses where fortunes were kept in chests and strong rooms. The total wealth they carried away was staggering. Some accounts say the haul was worth millions of rupees, which in today's terms would be an almost unimaginable amount. But here is what made Shivaji different from every other raider of his time. He gave clear orders: no harming ordinary people, no attacking the poor, no burning homes. His men left the English and Dutch trading factories completely untouched. These were European merchant companies doing business in the city, and Shivaji had no quarrel with them. His target was specific: Mughal wealth, Mughal pride, Mughal authority. That choice was not just kindness. It was a message, delivered with perfect precision. He was not a bandit. He was not a warlord burning everything in sight. He was a king making a political statement, and he wanted the world to read it clearly. Aurangzeb, sitting on his throne in Delhi, controlled the richest empire in the world, and he could not protect its most important port. The news hit Aurangzeb hard, not just because of the money, though the money was enormous. It was the humiliation. Surat was sacred to Mughal authority. The pilgrimage route to Mecca ran through it. The empire's trading relationships depended on it. And Shivaji had walked in, taken what he wanted, and walked out. For the Maratha people, it was proof that their king can reach anywhere. For the Mughal Empire, it was a warning that could not be ignored. Aurangzeb's patience had a limit, and Shivaji had just found it. The emperor would not send another general to make a point this time. Part 5. The Treaty of Purandar. Forced compromise and strategic retreat. And Aurangzeb did exactly that. The man he chose was Mirza Raja Jai Singh, a Rajput king who served the Mughal emperor, brilliant at both war and politics. This was not a general who simply charged in with soldiers. Jai Singh was patient, calculated, and thorough. He came with a massive army and a clear plan. Do not chase Shivaji across mountains. Instead, cut him off, piece by piece. The strategy was simple but devastating. Jai Singh began capturing Shivaji's forts, one by one. Not by brute force alone, but by surrounding them, cutting off their supplies, and then offering generous deals to the soldiers inside. Some forts held, many didn't. And with each fort that fell, Shivaji's circle of control got smaller. At the same time, Jai Singh was working the political angles. He sent messages to local chiefs, offering rewards for loyalty and threatening consequences for defiance. He was pulling the ground from under Shivaji's feet without always needing to fight. By 1665, Shivaji was in serious trouble. He still had his army. He still had some forts, but he was surrounded, outmaneuvered, and running low on options. The pressure was coming from every direction at once. So he made the hardest decision a proud man can make. He agreed to talk. The result was the Treaty of Purandar. On paper, it looked like total defeat. Shivaji gave up 23 of his forts, nearly half of what he had built over years of fighting and sacrifice. He also agreed to send his young son Sambhaji to serve in the Mughal army, which was essentially sending his own child as a guarantee that he would behave. To anyone watching from the outside, it looked like Shivaji had been broken. But look closer and you see something different. His core army was untouched. His best commanders were still with him. A handful of his most important forts remained in his hands. He had given up land, but not his ability to fight. He had bent, not broken. Shivaji understood something that many leaders forget. Surviving with your strength intact is not the same as losing. Sometimes you give ground so you can live to take it back. And now, with the treaty signed, Jai Singh extended an unusual invitation. He suggested Shivaji travel to Agra, the heart of the Mughal Empire, and meet Aurangzeb in person. Perhaps peace was possible. Perhaps there was a future where Shivaji served the empire as a great general, the way Jai Singh himself did. Shivaji agreed to go. What happened next in that royal court, in the very palace of the most powerful emperor in the world, would become the most talked about moment of his entire life. Chapter 4. The Agra Gamble and the Great Escape. Shivaji defies the emperor. Part 1. The Journey to Agra. Walking into the lion's den. The year was 1666. Shivaji had just survived the crushing weight of the Treaty of Purandar, forced to hand over 23 forts and bend the knee to Mughal power. It was the lowest point of his life, but he was not finished thinking. A powerful Mughal general named Jai Singh came to him with an idea. Go to Agra, he said. Meet Aurangzeb face to face. Show the emperor you are loyal. In return, you could receive a high-ranking command inside the Mughal army. That kind of position would give Shivaji real power, real protection, and a way to rebuild everything he had lost, but from inside the empire rather than against it. It sounded like a plan. It was also a trap, though nobody knew that yet. Shivaji thought hard about it. Agra was far, nearly 1,000 miles north, deep inside Mughal territory. It was the heart of the most powerful empire in Asia. Going there meant walking away from his forts, his men, his mountains, everything that had kept him alive and free. If Aurangzeb wanted him dead, there would be no escape. But Shivaji said yes. Maybe he believed Jai Singh's promises. Maybe he thought a bold move could win him something no sword could. Maybe he simply felt that doing nothing was worse than taking the risk. Whatever the reason, he packed his things and started the long journey north, bringing his young son Sambhaji with him. Think about what that means. He did not just go alone. He brought his child into the lion's mouth. The road to Agra was long and hot. Shivaji traveled with a large group of his men, moving through towns and cities that all answered to Aurangzeb. Every face in the crowd could have been a spy. Every checkpoint was a reminder of just how far from home he was. When the hills of the Deccan finally disappeared behind him, Shivaji was no longer a king in his own land. He was a visitor in someone else's empire, moving closer every day to a man who had every reason to want him gone. He arrived in Agra with his head held high. He had come to make a deal. He had come to be recognized, respected, and rewarded. What happened next would shock him, and light a fire that no Mughal army could ever put out. Part 2. The Court Humiliation, Aurangzeb's calculated insult, and Shivaji's fury. He walked into that durbar, Aurangzeb's grand royal court, expecting to be treated like the warrior king he was. The hall was full of nobles, generals, and princes, all ranked by their standing in the empire. And Shivaji, who had fought the Mughals to a standstill and earned a peace treaty on his own terms, expected to be placed somewhere near the top. He was not. Aurangzeb placed him among the lower-ranked Mansabdars, basically mid-level commanders, men far beneath Shivaji in reputation, power, and achievement. Think of it like being a decorated war hero and getting seated at the children's table. It was a deliberate message, delivered in front of everyone. Shivaji did something almost no one ever did in that court. He lost his temper publicly. He raised his voice. He protested out loud, right there in the hall, which was a massive breach of Mughal etiquette. In Aurangzeb's court, you bowed, you stayed quiet, and you were grateful. You did not shout. The room must have gone silent. Aurangzeb had a choice. He could have executed Shivaji on the spot. But killing the king who had just traveled peacefully to your court, in front of all your nobles, would create a political mess. It would signal to every other ruler that coming to Agra in good faith was a death sentence. So instead, Aurangzeb did something quieter. He placed Shivaji under house arrest. Guards were posted around his accommodation. He could not leave Agra. He was a prisoner, just a comfortable one, for now. For most people, that would be the end. You sit, you wait, you slowly lose any power you had back home. Maybe you get quietly poisoned a year later. Nobody makes a fuss. The empire moves on. But Shivaji started thinking the moment those guards appeared. He noticed that every day, large baskets of sweets and goods were sent out from his residence to local temples and religious institutions, a common act of charity that the guards had grown used to waving through. The baskets left, the baskets came back empty. Nobody checked too carefully. He also had loyal men around him who could move, buy things, make contacts, and quietly arrange what needed to be arranged. A plan began to take shape. A plan so bold and so carefully put together that when it worked, people across the subcontinent would talk about it for centuries. Aurangzeb had tried to cage the one man who had never once stopped moving. And somewhere inside that guarded house in Agra, Shivaji was already planning how to walk out. What came next, the escape, the disguises, the long road home, would turn a king into a legend. Part 3. The Great Escape. Baskets, disguises, and the road back to the Deccan. The plan that had been quietly taking shape inside that guarded house in Agra was not the work of a desperate man. It was the work of a sharp mind that had spent years outthinking enemies far larger than himself. Here is what Shivaji noticed. Every day, large baskets of sweets and food were being carried out of his compound as gifts to nearby temples and religious institutions. The Mughal guards had grown used to it. Baskets going out, baskets coming back. It was routine. And routine is exactly where a clever escape hides. One day in August 1666, Shivaji climbed into one of those baskets. His young son Sambhaji was smuggled out separately, hidden among the attendants. And just like that, right under the noses of the guards, the man the Mughal Empire had spent years trying to control walked out through the front door in a wicker basket full of sweets. But getting out of the compound was only the beginning. The road back to the Deccan was hundreds of miles long, and every stretch of it was Mughal territory. There were checkpoints. There were caravanserais, roadside inns where travelers stopped and strangers were noticed. There were soldiers who had been told to watch for a Maratha king and his son. So Shivaji and Sambhaji did not travel as themselves. They moved separately, under false names, carrying forged papers, dressed as ordinary travelers. Local contacts helped them along the way, people who knew who he was and risked everything to help him pass through safely. Every checkpoint was a gamble. Every stop was a moment where one wrong word, one suspicious guard, one person who recognized the face could have ended everything. But Shivaji had nerve like very few people in history. He kept moving, kept playing the role, kept his fear buried somewhere deep where it could not show on his face. The journey took months. When he finally crossed back into his own hills, the Sahyadri mountains of the Deccan, where his fort sat high above the clouds, word spread like fire. Shivaji was back. He had walked into the heart of the Mughal Empire and walked back out again. People across Maharashtra celebrated in a way they had never celebrated before. This was not just a military victory. This was something people could barely believe. The most powerful empire in Asia had tried to hold him, and it could not. For ordinary people, it felt almost like a miracle. For Aurangzeb, it was a humiliation he could not forget. And for Shivaji, it was not the end. If anything, it was the moment everything truly began. He had escaped the cage. Now he was about to show the empire exactly what that meant. Part 4. Rebuilding and Reconquest, retaking what was lost in 3 years. He came back to the Deccan with nothing but his life and his name. The forts were gone. The treasury was thin. The Mughal Empire had squeezed him hard through the Treaty of Purandar, taking 23 forts and a massive chunk of his territory. Most leaders in that position would have spent years just recovering. Shivaji spent 3 years preparing to hit back. The moment he was home, he got to work. Quietly at first. He rebuilt the system that kept his kingdom running. The tax collectors, the record keepers, the supply lines. He filled his storehouses back up. He trained new soldiers and brought old ones back into shape. He was not sitting around feeling sorry for himself. He was loading a spring. By 1670, the spring was fully loaded. He moved fast and he moved hard. One by one, he started taking back the forts that had been handed over under that hated treaty. It was not one big battle. It was a rapid series of strikes, each one calculated, each one executed before the Mughals could properly respond. Within a short span, most of those 23 forts were flying his flag again. The same forts Aurangzeb thought he had locked away forever. Then Shivaji did something that sent a message louder than any speech ever could. He sacked Surat again. The first time he hit Surat, back in 1664, the whole empire had shaken. Now, in 1670, he walked straight back into that rich Mughal trading city and did it again. He took the wealth he needed to keep his campaign going. But this was not just about money. This was Shivaji standing in front of the entire subcontinent and saying, plainly, clearly, without any room for doubt, that the Treaty of Purandar meant nothing. 4 years of Mughal pressure had bought them nothing permanent. He was back, and he was stronger. That was the thing about Shivaji that made him genuinely different from most commanders of his time. He could take a terrible blow, absorb it completely, and come back not just restored, but sharper. Most men after Agra and Purandar would have been finished. He used that period to rebuild from the ground up. The Mughals now faced a Shivaji who was rested, reorganized, and furious. His forts were back, his army was larger, his treasury was refilled, and the people of Maharashtra watched all of this happen and believed, more than ever, that this man was simply not beatable. Aurangzeb understood that the land war against Shivaji had just reset itself. What neither of them had fully thought through yet was that Shivaji was about to open an entirely new front, one that no Indian ruler of his time had seriously considered. He was turning his eyes toward the sea. Part 5. The Naval Vision. Shivaji looks to the sea and builds India's first modern fleet. He had taken back his forts. He had refilled his treasury. He had humiliated the Mughals twice on land. But Shivaji was already looking past all of that. He was standing on the western coast of India, staring at the sea, and seeing something that almost no other Indian ruler of his time bothered to see. The Konkan coast, the long strip of land running down India's western edge, was a mess of competing powers. The cities, a group of African-origin naval commanders based at the island fort of Janjira, raided freely along the coast. The Portuguese held Goa and controlled stretches of the shoreline. And then there were the English and the Dutch, trading companies on paper, but arriving with warships, cannons, and a quiet hunger for something much bigger than trade. Shivaji looked at all of this and understood something that took remarkable clarity to see. Land was not the whole story. Whoever controlled the sea controlled the future. So he built a navy, not a collection of borrowed boats or hired pirates, a real, purpose-built war fleet. The ships were designed specifically for the Konkan coast, shallow, fast, and nimble enough to move through the narrow inlets and choppy waters that larger foreign vessels struggled with. It was smart engineering for a very specific problem. He set up naval bases at places like Vijayadurg and Sindhudurg. Sindhudurg itself was extraordinary, a fort built on an island just off the coast, rising straight out of the sea. Workers used iron and lead to lock the stones together. It was meant to last, and it did. He appointed commanders to lead this fleet, and the most famous of those who followed in that tradition was Kanhoji Angre. Under Angre and his successors, the Maratha navy made life genuinely difficult for the English and the Portuguese for decades. These were not small skirmishes. These were serious naval confrontations that slowed the ambitions of European powers along India's western coast. What makes this so remarkable is how alone Shivaji was in thinking this way. Most rulers of his time, Mughal, Rajput, Deccan thought about cavalry, infantry, and forts. The sea was someone else's problem. Shivaji saw it as his opportunity. He was building something no one had asked for and almost no one expected. A Maratha kingdom that could fight on water as well as on land. But even as the fleet took shape, and the coastal forts rose from the sea, the war with Aurangzeb was far from finished. The emperor in Delhi had watched Shivaji escape captivity, recapture his forts, and now build warships. Aurangzeb was not the kind of man who accepted any of that quietly. The next confrontation between these two men would be bigger, longer, and far more personal than anything that had come before. Chapter 5. The Coronation and the State. Shivaji becomes Chhatrapati. Part 1. The political need for a crown. Why Shivaji required royal legitimacy. Shivaji had beaten armies 3 times his size. He had outrun the Mughals, outlasted Bijapur, and built something no one expected, a real kingdom, with forts, ships, soldiers, and taxes. But there was a problem, a serious one. Nobody officially recognized him as a king. In 17th-century India, power was not just about how many forts you held or how many soldiers followed you. It was about what people called you. And by the rules of Hindu political tradition, a real king had to be crowned in a proper ceremony, one that declared in front of gods and men that this person had the right to rule. Without that, Shivaji was still just a chieftain in many people's eyes. A very successful one, sure, but not a king. It went deeper than that. The Brahmin scholars who held enormous social authority at the time had a problem with his family background. They said the Bhonsle clan were Kumbis. That meant farmers, peasants. And in the strict caste system of the time, only Kshatriyas, the warrior class, had the right to be crowned as kings. So the Brahmins looked at Shivaji and said, "You do not qualify." This was not a small insult. This was a wall. For Shivaji, though, a wall was just another problem to solve. He knew exactly what a coronation would do. It would change everything. It would take his life's work, the wars, the forts, the navy, the administration, and wrap it in something that would last beyond him. A recognized kingdom did not die with its founder. It lived on. It had laws, heirs, and a name. It could claim the loyalty of people who had never met Shivaji personally, simply because the throne meant something. Without the crown, Swarajya, his idea of self-rule, was just a rebellion. With it, it became a royal institution, a civilization, something bigger than any one man. And Shivaji had spent his whole life thinking bigger than anyone expected. He also understood something very practical. The Mughals in Bijapur could dismiss a chieftain. They could call him an outlaw, a bandit, an upstart without a proper name, but they could not dismiss a crowned Hindu king so easily. A coronation would force people, enemies included, to take him seriously in a completely new way. So by the early 1670s, with his kingdom at its strongest, Shivaji turned his attention to the one battle he had not yet won. Not a battle with swords and horses, but a battle of legitimacy. A battle over who he was allowed to be called. He was going to become Chhatrapati, a sovereign king, and to do it, he would have to fight a very different kind of enemy, the scholars who controlled the rules of who was royal and who was not. Part 2. The Genealogical Battle, proving Kshatriya blood against Brahmin resistance. So Shivaji had his kingdom. He had his army, his forts, his navy, but there was one wall he still needed to break through, and this wall was not made of stone. It was made of words, old texts, family records, and the opinions of very powerful priests. Here's the problem. In 17th-century India, your caste, the group you were born into, decided almost everything about who you were allowed to be. To become a proper Hindu king, you had to be a Kshatriya. That meant you had to come from a warrior bloodline. It was the rule, no exceptions. The Brahmin scholars of the time said Shivaji's family, the Bhonsles, were Kumbis, farmers, common people, not warriors, not royalty. And if that label stuck, no coronation in the world would make him a real king in the eyes of Hindu tradition. Shivaji was not going to accept that. He sent for a man named Gagabat. This man lived in Varanasi, the holiest city in India, and he was one of the most respected Brahmin scholars alive. His opinion carried enormous weight. If Gagabat said something was true, very few people would dare argue with him. Shivaji hired Gagabat to research his family's past and prove, in writing, that the Bhonsles were actually descended from the Sisodia Rajputs of Mewar. The Sisodias were one of the most famous Kshatriya warrior families in all of India. Connecting to their bloodline was like connecting to royalty itself. Now, was this purely a search for historical truth? Not entirely. This was also a political move. Shivaji needed the paperwork, the credentials, and the right name behind them. Gagabat provided all three. But not everyone fell in line. Local Brahmin groups in the Deccan pushed back hard. They did not accept the findings. They had their own opinions, their own pride, and their own reasons to keep Shivaji in his place. So Shivaji did what he always did when one strategy was not enough. He combined several at once. He had Gagabat's authority. He added generous payments to priests who agreed to participate. And he applied quiet political pressure where needed. Slowly, the resistance cracked. This whole fight over family trees and ancient bloodlines might sound like a strange thing for a military genius to spend time on. But Shivaji understood something important. Power is not just about who wins battles. It is about who gets to write the rules, and he was rewriting them. With his Kshatriya status now officially certified, the path to the throne was open. The scholars had been answered, the paperwork was done, the stage at Rajgad was being prepared, and the ceremony that was about to take place would be unlike anything India had seen in a very long time. Part 3. The Coronation at Rajgad, the most spectacular event in 17th-century India. On June 6, 1674, the sun rose over the Sahyadri mountains and lit up one of the most extraordinary days in Indian history. Rajgad was not just a fort. Shivaji had spent years turning it into a proper royal capital, with wide streets, grand halls, markets, temples, and a throne room fit for a king. It sat high on a cliff, almost like it was touching the sky. Getting there meant climbing steep steps cut into the rock, and on this particular morning, thousands of people made that climb. Brahmins came, chieftains came, nobles came, common farmers, soldiers, traders, people from across the Maratha lands made their way up to Rajgad because they somehow understood that what was about to happen mattered. Gagabat, the respected scholar from Varanasi who had certified Shivaji's Kshatriya lineage, now stood at the center of it all. He led the Vedic rituals, ancient sacred ceremonies that had not been performed for a Hindu king in this part of India for a very long time. Priests poured water over Shivaji. Not just any water, water brought from India's most sacred rivers, the Ganga, the Godavari, rivers that Hindus considered holy. The act was deeply meaningful. It was saying, this man belongs to this land blesses him. Then came the royal symbols, a crown, a throne, sacred items that in the Hindu tradition were not just decorations, but signs that the universe itself was recognizing a rightful king. And then the title, Chhatrapati. It means Lord of the Umbrella. In ancient Indian tradition, only a true sovereign king could have a royal umbrella held above him. It was not about shade, it was about status, about power, about being the one person in a kingdom who answers to no one else on earth. The crowd heard that title, and they knew what it meant. This was no longer a rebel chief, this was a king. But Shivaji did not stop there. After the main ceremony, he took one more title, Haindava Dharmadharak. It means protector of the Hindu faith. He was not just saying he was powerful, he was saying he stood for something, that his kingdom had a purpose beyond conquest. Think about what this moment looked like. A man who was told for years that he was not the right caste, did not have the right blood, did not deserve a crown, was now sitting on a throne that almost no Hindu king in that region had sat on for generations. He had fought for it on battlefields, he had argued for it in scholarly debates, he had built forts and fleets and entire systems of government to make it real, and now it was real. But a crown is only the beginning. A king needs more than a title to hold a kingdom together. What Shivaji built next, the laws, the courts, the administration, the rules his armies had to follow, that story is just as remarkable as the coronation itself. Part 4. Building the Maratha state, revenue, justice, law, and administration. So Shivaji was now a crowned king, but a crown does not run a kingdom. Someone still has to collect taxes, settle disputes between neighbors, pay the soldiers, and make sure the roads are safe. That is the unglamorous work of governing, and Shivaji turned out to be just as brilliant at it as he was on the battlefield. He built something called the Ashtapradhan. In plain words, it was a cabinet of 8 ministers. Each one handled a different piece of the kingdom. One managed money, one handled foreign relations with other kingdoms, one oversaw the military, one dealt with justice and law. Think of it like a modern government, but in the 17th century. Each minister had a clear job and answered directly to the king. This mattered more than it sounds. Most kings of that era ran things through powerful local lords who inherited their positions. If your father was a tax collector, you became a tax collector, whether you were good at it or not. Shivaji broke that pattern. He wanted capable people in positions of responsibility, not just people with the right family name. The tax system was one of his biggest reforms. Before Shivaji, tax collectors in the Deccan worked almost like thieves with official permission. They could demand whatever they wanted from farmers, pocket the difference, and leave villages ruined. Shivaji replaced this with fixed, measured assessments based on the actual quality of the land. A farmer knew in advance exactly what he owed. No surprises, no extortion. This was personal for Shivaji. His entire movement, Swarajya, the idea of self-rule, was built on the support of ordinary farming people. If his own government crushed them, the same way the Mughals and Bijapur Sultans had, what was the point of winning? His army also ran differently. Soldiers were paid regular wages in cash. They were not expected to loot villages to feed themselves, a common and devastating practice in armies of that time. A paid soldier has no excuse to steal, and Shivaji made sure that excuse never existed. He also built courts with proper procedures. Disputes were heard, evidence was considered. It was not perfect, no system is, but it was structured, and structure alone was a dramatic improvement over the chaos most people in the region had known. What Shivaji created was a state that actually functioned. Not just a warlord with forts, but a real government with systems, rules, and accountability. The farmers who worked his lands knew this difference. The merchants who traded under his protection knew it too. But a government is only as good as the people who carry out its orders, especially the soldiers. And Shivaji had very specific ideas about how his army should behave. Ideas that would shock anyone who knew what war looked like in that part of the world at that time. Part 5. The Maratha Military Code, Discipline, Ethics, and the Rules of War. And that army was unlike anything people had seen before. Most armies in that era operated like a moving disaster. They burned villages, they looted homes, they dragged people away as slaves. Women were treated as prizes of war. Religious places, temples, mosques, shrines, nothing was off limits. This was just how war worked. Soldiers expected it, commanders allowed it. People in the path of any army simply prayed they would survive. Shivaji looked at all of that and said no. He created something almost unheard of at the time, a written code of conduct for his soldiers. Real rules, with real consequences. His men were not allowed to harm civilians, not allowed to loot homes of ordinary people, not allowed to touch mosques or Muslim shrines, not allowed to enslave anyone they captured. If a woman was taken during a raid, she was to be returned to her family, safely and with respect. These were not suggestions, they were orders, and if a soldier broke those rules, he was punished, publicly, so everyone could see that Shivaji meant it. Now some people might think this was just Shivaji being a good person, and maybe he was. But there was something smarter happening here too. Think about it from his position. He was building a new kingdom. His armies moved through towns and villages filled with people who had no reason to trust them. Those people had seen other armies before, armies that burned and stole and hurt. If the Maratha soldiers showed up and acted the same way, those people would see Shivaji as just another warlord, another disaster walking through their lives. But if his soldiers showed up and did not touch their homes, did not hurt their families, did not destroy their places of worship, suddenly he was something different. Suddenly Swaraja, his whole idea of self-rule, felt real to the people living under it. It felt like freedom, not just a change of rulers. It also sent a powerful message to Muslim communities in the region. Shivaji was not fighting a religious war against Islam. He was fighting for political independence. Protecting mosques and shrines proved that in a way no speech ever could. The code built trust. Trust built loyalty. Loyalty built a kingdom. This was the kind of thinking that made Shivaji so hard to stop. He was not just winning battles, he was winning the people. By 1674, he had a navy, an army, a government, a code of law, and now, for the first time, people across the region who genuinely believed in what he was building. The next step was to make it all official in the eyes of the world, and for that, Shivaji needed a crown. Chapter 6. The Final Wars and the Legacy that Outlasted an Empire. Part 1. Aurangzeb's Southern Obsession. The Mughal Emperor's Fatal Miscalculation. The coronation at Rajgad was barely a few years old when Aurangzeb made a decision that would echo through history. He packed up the Mughal court, left Delhi, and marched south himself. Not just sending generals, not just issuing orders from a distant throne. He went personally, and he never came back. Aurangzeb was the most powerful ruler on earth at the time. His empire stretched across most of the Indian subcontinent. His armies were enormous, his treasury was deep, and he was absolutely certain he could crush the Maratha problem once and for all. He was wrong. First, he swallowed up Bijapur and Golconda, the two great Deccan sultanates that had existed for over a century. That part went smoothly, but the Marathas were a different thing entirely. They did not fight like a conventional enemy. They had no single capital city that could be captured to end the war. They had no front line that could be broken. They melted into the hills, raided supply lines, and reappeared somewhere else entirely. Aurangzeb threw hundreds of thousands of soldiers at this problem. He built forts. He captured forts. The Marathas took them back. He moved his enormous camp, which was more like a moving city than a military base, across the Deccan for years, then more years, then decades. 26 years. That is how long Aurangzeb stayed in the south. He grew old there. His treasury, which had once seemed bottomless, began to run dry. Feeding and paying an army of that size, year after year, with no decisive victory in sight, quietly ate the Mughal Empire alive from the inside. Shivaji himself died in 1680, before the full weight of Aurangzeb's campaign came crashing down. But the things Shivaji had built did not die with him. The loyalty he had earned from ordinary people, the military doctrine his commanders knew by heart, the idea of Swarajya, that this land belonged to its own people, all of that survived him. The Sahyadri hills did not care how many soldiers Aurangzeb sent. The valleys and ridges and dense forests were still there, still impossible for a massive traditional army to control. Every village that Shivaji had treated fairly, every soldier who remembered what they were fighting for, every commander trained in the art of striking fast and vanishing, they all kept going. Aurangzeb had made the mistake of thinking that killing or capturing a leader ends a movement. But Shivaji had built something that was bigger than one man. He had planted an idea, and ideas are remarkably hard to kill with an army. The Mughal Emperor would soon discover just how true that was, in the most brutal way possible. Part 2. Shivaji's death and the question of succession, the fragile moment. And then, on April 3, 1680, it ended. Shivaji died at Rajgad fort. He was around 50 years old. The man who had outrun armies, escaped from Mughal prisons, and built a kingdom from almost nothing, was gone. Most likely it was fever that took him, combined with a body simply worn out from 3 decades of never stopping. No dramatic last battle, no final showdown, just a man whose body finally said enough. The fort went quiet, and then the panic started. Here is the thing about a leader like Shivaji. So much of what he built ran on him. His instincts, his relationships, his ability to read a situation and make the right call. The system he created was real. The army, the navy, the forts, the tax codes, all real. But holding it all together still required someone at the center with his level of judgment, and that person was now gone. His chosen heir was his son, Sambhaji. And Sambhaji had a problem. He was brave, genuinely brave. He could fight. He had proven himself on the battlefield more than once. But he and his father had a difficult relationship, and by the time Shivaji died, Sambhaji was already in open tension with a powerful group inside the royal court. These were men who had served Shivaji loyally, but now had their own ideas about who should really be running things. So instead of a clean handover, there was a fight. A messy, dangerous political scramble over who would take the throne, at exactly the moment when the empire outside the fort walls was hungry and watching. This is what historians call a succession crisis. It sounds like a formal term, but the simple version is this: the king is dead, and everyone is suddenly asking the same question at the same time. Who is in charge now? Shivaji had seen this danger. He had tried to prepare, but even he could not fully solve the problem of what happens after a once-in-a-generation leader disappears. The structures he built were strong. The idea of Swarajya, the belief that this land and its people deserved to be free, was very much alive. But the man who had carried all of it on his shoulders was no longer there to carry it. What the Marathas did next would test everything Shivaji had built to its absolute limit. His son would face Aurangzeb's full force, make choices both heroic and costly, and ultimately pay a price that would shake every Maratha to the core, and somehow, impossibly, make them stronger. Part 3. Sambhaji's Defiance and Martyrdom. The Maratha spirit tested to breaking point. Sambhaji was not his father. Everyone knew it, and so did he. But he was brave in a raw, stubborn way that was entirely his own. When Aurangzeb poured his armies into the Deccan, Sambhaji did not run. He fought back, hard and for years. The Marathas kept doing what they did best: hit fast, disappear into the hills, bleed the enemies slowly. Aurangzeb had the largest army in the world, but the Sahyadri mountains did not care about numbers. Every time the Mughals thought they had cornered the Marathas were already gone. But in 1689, everything changed. Sambhaji was betrayed. Not defeated in battle, betrayed. Someone from his own circle handed him over. He was captured at Sangameshwar, bound and brought before Aurangzeb in chains. This was the moment Aurangzeb had been waiting for. He had been chasing the Marathas for nearly a decade, and here, finally, was their king. What followed was not a quick execution. Aurangzeb wanted more than Sambhaji's death. He wanted his surrender. He wanted him to convert to Islam, to bow, to break. He wanted to show every Maratha that their resistance was pointless. For weeks, Sambhaji was tortured. His tongue was cut out. His eyes were gouged. Every day brought more pain, and every day the same offer sat on the table: convert, and it stops. Sambhaji never said yes. He died in March 1689, executed after enduring things most people cannot imagine. He was 31 years old. Aurangzeb probably expected the Marathas to collapse after that. Their king was dead, humiliated, destroyed. Surely they would give up now. They did the opposite. Something happened to the Marathas after Sambhaji's death. that is hard to explain, but easy to feel. The grief turned into something harder. The horror of what Aurangzeb had done to their king did not break their spirit, it became their spirit. Every Maratha warrior who picked up a sword after 1689 carried that image with them. A young man who refused to kneel, even when it cost him everything. Martyrdom is a strange and powerful thing. It turns a person into an idea. And ideas are much harder to kill than people. Aurangzeb had won the battle that day in 1689, but without knowing it, he had guaranteed that he would never win the war. He had given the Marathas something no military victory could take away, a reason to keep fighting that went beyond politics, beyond territory, beyond strategy. The Deccan would not submit. The years ahead would prove it again and again, at enormous cost to both sides. But one side was running out of money, men, and time. The other side had just been given a story they would never forget. And stories, as Aurangzeb was about to learn, outlast empires. Part 4. The Maratha Confederacy and the Peshwa Age. Shivaji's vision scales across India. Aurangzeb died in 1707. He was 88 years old, exhausted and broken. He had spent the last 2.5 decades camped in the Deccan, pouring men, money, and time into a war he could never finish. His treasury was empty. His army was stretched thin across a subcontinent too large to hold. And the empire he left behind was already cracking at the edges. The Marathas were still there. That was the thing. After everything, the death of Shivaji, the capture and killing of Sambhaji, decades of brutal war, the Maratha kingdom had not only survived, it was ready to grow. And grow it did, fast. With the Mughals weakening, the Marathas moved, not just in the Deccan, but north, east, and west. Within a generation, Maratha armies were collecting taxes in Delhi. They were pushing into Punjab. Their flags flew from the hills of Rajasthan to the coasts of Bengal. A small hill kingdom that had once fought just to survive was now a power that stretched across almost the entire subcontinent. This was the age of the Peshwas. The Peshwa was the prime minister of the Maratha state, and over time, this role became so powerful that the Peshwas practically ran the whole empire. These were sharp, ambitious men from a family of Brahmin administrators. Under them, the Maratha state went from a kingdom to a confederacy, a loose but powerful network of great Maratha families, each controlling their own territory. There was Holkar in the north, Scindia building power across central India, the Bhonsle family holding Nagpur in the east, Gaikwad controlling Baroda in the west. Each family was strong on its own. Together, they were a force that no single ruler in India could ignore. And underneath all of it, the military strategy, the way they governed, the idea that the land and its people deserved to be free, all of that came from Shivaji. He had not lived to see any of this. He died when the empire was still small, still fragile. But what he had built was not just an army or a kingdom. He had built a way of thinking, a belief that ordinary people, fighting on their own land, for their own future, could take on the mightiest power in the world and win. That belief traveled. It spread through every Maratha family, every soldier, every administrator who came after him. Shivaji had given his people not just a state, but an idea. And ideas are harder to kill than kings. The Confederacy would face its own troubles in the years ahead. There would be betrayals, costly wars, and moments of near collapse. But the story of how it all began, one man, a handful of forts, and an unbreakable refusal to bow, never stopped mattering. And that story is exactly why Shivaji Maharaj is still remembered today. Part 5. Shivaji's eternal relevance, guerrilla pioneer, nation builder, and the idea that never died. So what do you do with a man like Shivaji once he is gone? You cannot bury his ideas with him. That much became clear very quickly. Centuries after his death, people kept coming back to him, not just in Maharashtra, but across India. And they kept coming back for the same reason. He had answers to questions that never stopped being asked. Think about it simply. He was a man with almost nothing. No inherited empire, no vast army, no powerful backers. And he built something that outlasted kings and emperors. People who felt powerless looked at that and thought, maybe we can too. That is exactly what Bal Gangadhar Tilak thought. Tilak was a leader in the 1890s fighting British colonial rule. India was under British control, and most Indians felt crushed and small under that weight. Tilak needed a symbol, someone who could remind ordinary people that resisting a massive power was not madness, it was possible. He chose Shivaji. He started public festivals in Shivaji's name, gathering thousands of people together, using the story of that one young man from the Sahyadri hills to light a fire under a whole generation. It worked. The British noticed. They were not happy about it. But Tilak understood something true. Shivaji's story was not just about the past. It was a blueprint, a proof that the small can fight the large and win if they are smart, committed, and willing to think differently. On the military side, What Shivaji did with guerrilla warfare was quietly ahead of his time by centuries. He understood that you do not have to beat your enemy in a straight fight. You exhaust them, you use the land against them, you hit them where they are soft. You disappear before they can hit back. Commanders in wars fought hundreds of years after Shivaji's death would figure out the same things, often the hard way. Shivaji had already written that chapter. His navy was another leap forward. At a time when Indian rulers mostly ignored the sea, he built warships and protected his coastline. He saw water not as a border, but as a road, one that enemies could use against you if you left it unguarded. And as a ruler, he governed in a way that was genuinely rare for his time. He protected temples and mosques alike. He insisted his soldiers treat ordinary people, farmers, women, the poor, with respect. He made law matter. He built a state where people felt they belonged, not just where they were forced to obey. That combination, brilliant fighter, fair ruler, symbol of hope, is why the legend never faded. Empires rise and fall. The Mughals crumbled. The Marathas eventually lost to the British. The British left. But Shivaji remained, not because of statues or official holidays. He remained because the questions he answered with his life are still the hardest questions people face. How do you fight when you are outnumbered? How do you build something that lasts? How do you lead so that people actually believe in what you are doing? He answered all three. And that is a story that does not have an ending.